So this morning we continue in our series, The Human. And up to this point, what we've said and what we've suggested in this particular Christian vision of what it means to be humanity and what it means to be a human being is that we have finite knowledge, right? Most of the things that we know because of our own experience. And in order to know more than that which we are limited to know by our own limited experience, we need the testimony of others. And so we have the testimony of our family and our friends and our neighbors, and we have the testimony of the news, and we have the testimony of social media, we have the testimony of science, we have the testimony of all of these different voices to help sort of round out and gather in as much knowledge as possible. And as we're thinking about what it means to be humanity and what it means to be a human being, we want to account for the testimony of the witnesses of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, so we want to read the Bible and we want to find out what is the testimony of Scripture that would form for us a Christian vision of what it means to be human. And what we've seen throughout the course of the last several weeks is that a Christian vision of being human means that we are created. And because we are created, we have a particular purpose. And that purpose is to be God's image and likeness in creation. And so God created us as male and male embodiment and female embodiment communicate. We are an icon of who God is and what God is like. And as we relate to one another and as we are interrelated, we are fruitful, and that reveals something of God in creation. In addition to being fruitful, we as male and female are an image and a likeness. We represent God's presence on earth, and we are meant to mediate His rule and His reign, His good sovereign rule and reign over creation. And when God created humanity, male and female, and when that was done, as male and female, humanity was created in God's image and likeness to be together, to be fruitful, to be God's presence, and to rule and to reign as God's stewards over His creation. God said, it is very good. But one of the things that we see between this vision of humanity and what we experience day in and day out is kind of a little bit different. Our embodiment is somehow or another broken. And we experience this as we age. We experience this as we get sick. I mean, goodness gracious, if there's ever been a year when we understand that our physicality is challengeable, our embodiment is fragile, it has been this year. And we see other ways in which embodiment, our physicality, is broken. It doesn't work the way it was meant to. We understand that something is kind of wrong, if you will. And we look at things like, and I don't mean to be picking on anybody in particular, okay? But we could look at things like when we're encouraged to send money for cleft palate repairs in the majority world. The fact that there are cleft palates, we go, oh man, something isn't quite right there. Something isn't the way it's supposed to be. When we see people who have limbs on their body, but those limbs don't function the way that it seems like they should be, we go, hold on a second, that isn't quite right. Or you take somebody who's born with, for instance, some sort of a genetic situation. Like one of my children has a bicuspid aortic valve and had to have a surgery when they're a baby to correct their aorta so that they would live. You know, there are these things where even in our genetic composition, even in our genetic makeup, things just are a bit off. Even if we perceive ourselves, or even if we could be perceived by others as being relatively healthy, well, and whole, actually, that's just not the case. Somebody might say, Peter, that's easy for you to say because you look to be a pretty able-bodied, healthy, well, whole person. But that doesn't mean that my body hasn't been challenged. I almost lost my leg when I was a kid because I had a MRSA infection in my ankle. Like, there are things that happen. I get sick just like anybody else does. I fall and I get bruises and I can break my bones just like anybody else can. My physicality is fragile. And we all age and die. Not only is our embodiment broken, not only is even at a genetic level, is there something compromised about our physicality, our relationships are challenged. Our interrelatedness is broken. We use positions of authority or submission to oppose people rather than to lift people up. And so we see authority or power and submission as being bad things, as being antagonistic things, rather than being cooperative things. We see people use power and authority to marginalize or oppress or mistreat others, particularly others who don't look like them. And so what we don't like to do generally is identify things within our embodiment or things within our mental situation or our emotional state that are unhealthy or unwhole or are broken or are different, because what we're afraid of is that in our broken relationships, people with power and authority will mistreat people who are already vulnerable. And so we don't like to talk about the brokenness. We don't like to talk about that. It's fearful for us because our relationships are broken. Not only our relationships between other people, not only is there racism, and not only is there sexism and classism and all other kinds of ways that we discriminate against one another and we devalue one another and we try to jockey ourselves into a greater value than somebody else, but we also have broken relationships with creation. Rather than ruling over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and the wild beasts and every creeping thing along the ground and everything else like that, rather than stewarding God's rule and God's reign over His creation, we've made ourselves the princes and princesses of creation. And we've interacted with creation in an exploitative way. We've interacted with creation in a careless way, in a reckless way. Animals, by nature, fear us. The deer run away when they see us. The pheasants fly off when we pass by. There's some sort of brokenness within our relationship with the created order. And we see that, and we're probably more aware of that now than we have been in my lifetime, at least. And there's this way in which we have removed ourselves from our connectedness to God, from which we find wholeness in ourselves, wholeness in our relationships with other people, and wholeness in our relationship with creation. And that wholeness, there's a Hebrew word that can be used to describe that wholeness. That's not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of blessing. And that Hebrew word is shalom. Generally kind of means peace. What we see in God's very good creation of humanity, this vision in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, in our lives, we don't quite experience that. And it's funny because as I suggest to us that we're broken, as I suggested earlier, we get a little bit scared. And we're quick to say, hey, hold on, nothing's wrong with me. But then give it 10 or 30 seconds later and we'll say, well, hold on, nobody's perfect. Well, hold on, is nobody perfect or is nothing wrong with you and nothing wrong with me? Which is it? I might suggest that we're fickle with that. And we want to use, hey, no, nothing's wrong with me, when we're feeling potentially insecure or fearful or threatened. And equally, we'll say, hold on. Nobody's perfect. When we're insecure, we're fearful, and we're threatened. In one, someone is identifying, well, actually, in both cases, someone is identifying something in us that is not whole. And you know what? Actually, it might not even be somebody external to us who's identifying that. We might be identifying that in ourselves. And most of us are spending a lot of our time actually trying to address that which is not whole in us. We're like Adam and Eve sewing fig leaves together. We're like, oh, crud, I'm naked. Ah! How do I cover this up? How do I cover up my embarrassment? How do I cover up my shame? How do I cover up my brokenness? How do I cover up that in my body which just isn't quite right? How do I cover up that which in my relationships isn't quite right? How do I cover up the fact that I just do not interact with the world like me and the world just miss? How do I cover that up? And how do I sew fig leaves together to cover that up? And holy cow, God is going to show up. And when he shows up, he's going to know all about that too. I don't know what to do. Hey, no one's perfect. Hey, nothing's wrong with me. I'm okay. But all the while, you know you're not. And I know I'm not. And all of this brokenness is rooted in a Christian vision of what it means that we are humanity. All of this brokenness amid God's beauty is rooted in our removal of fellowship with God, our disobedience to him. God just said, hey, listen, don't eat from this particular tree. Now, whether we're looking at Genesis 3 and we say, oh, that's a myth, or we say, no, that's historical fact, is almost irrelevant to the truth that it communicates. Here's this tree. It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it's not like, I don't think cognitive knowledge. It's not like someone's like, wow, I understand evil now. That's how I always imagined it growing up. Don't think knowledge, because oftentimes when the Bible talks about knowing, it's not talking about intellect, it's talking about experience. And when Adam and Eve disobeyed, they came to know good and evil because now they experienced evil. And see, God knows what it's like to experience evil. God already knew what it was like to experience evil because Satan and the demons and the angels who rebelled with him rebelled against him. They sinned against him. They rejected him. God also sits outside of time, and knowing what humanity was going to do, God has experienced evil. Sometimes the Bible describes Jesus as the Lamb who was slain before the foundation of the world. Before any of us had done anything good or bad, God had experienced that evil done to him. He knows good and evil. He has experienced evil perpetrated against him. And what he's saying is, I don't want for you, Adam and Eve, I don't want for you, humanity, to experience evil because it sucks. It's the worst, literally. It is the worst. And so Adam and Eve are deceived. The serpent says, God's withholding from you. God doesn't want you to be like him, which is so ironic because what did God do other than create them in his image and likeness? All the while, God's saying, no, I do want you to be like me. Like, that's why I created you, is to be like me in all of the good ways. And I want you to experience all the good things of what it means to be me and to be like me. I just don't want you to experience evil, because evil sucks. It's bad for you. You'll feel things that aren't nice to feel. You'll understand things that you'll wish you could unlearn. And all of us have had that. We've experienced things we go, oh, if I could just unexperience that. If I could just wipe that out. And I don't care, Peter, how much you learned from it and now you can sympathize with others. Shut up. I'm happy for somebody else to sympathize. Like, that is such a lame comfort, really. Sorry. But it just is. I don't want to sympathize with others about having experienced something dreadful. I don't want to experience dreadful things. Full stop. And God says, I don't want you to understand evil. I don't want you to experience evil. I don't want your brain to be able to go there. So here's this tree, and you go, well, why did God put that tree there in the first place then? I got to tell you, I don't know. That's a good conversation for another time. We can sit, we can have a pint, and we can wonder, and we can be curious. I've got my thoughts, but at any rate, Adam and Eve disobey God. It's really difficult to mediate God's will in creation if you won't receive God's will in yourself. Let me just say that again. It's really difficult to mediate God's will in creation if you won't receive God's will in yourself. And so they rejected God's instruction. They broke fellowship with God. And in that breaking of fellowship where God says, where are you? Not because he doesn't know, but because he wants Adam and Eve to think about it. And God's asking you right now, where are you? Not because he doesn't know, but maybe you need to consciously become aware. Where are you? Because the reality is I don't inhabit Genesis 1 and 2 humanity. My biology, my physiology, it's broken. My mental health is fragile. My emotional well-being is depends on the weather sometimes. My relationships, they're not always that great, man. I do the wrong things. I say the wrong things. I'm selfish. I'm not thoughtful. My attitude in creation is oftentimes wanting to use creation for my will rather than mediate God's will in it. And God asks me and asks you, where are you? I'm over here after Genesis chapter 3. My relationships with other people are broken. My relationship with creation is frustrated. And I look at myself and I go, how do I cover this up? Yes, I believe God created humanity very good. Beautiful. His image and his likeness. Iconic of who he is and what he is like. And I believe that icon has been damaged. I believe that image and that likeness has been tarnished. Our connectedness to God, which gives that icon, that image, and that likeness, vividness and wholeness, has been severed. But it doesn't have to stay like that. Next week, we're going to be talking a little bit more about this. I don't want to cut to the chase. We're going to talk about Jesus as the human. The way in which God is bringing us from brokenness and not just restoring our wholeness, but recreating an entirely new wholeness, an entirely new unity in humanity and in all of creation. But for now, I want us just to take a moment to hear God ask, where are you? Where is your brokenness? Where is your shame? Face it. And as you face it, know that the God who is asking you is the God who says, actually, let's get rid of those fig leaves and let me really clothe you. And not just let me really clothe you, but let me, by my Spirit, recreate you. He is a safe person to be honest with. So as we sing, let's just have a moment to be honest with God as he says, where are you? You say, here I am. And here is my brokenness. Would you forgive me? And would you heal me? And that's what we're going to find at the Lord's table.